A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. I seek refuge in Allah from Satan the accursed. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Brothers and sisters in Islam and in humanity, I greet you with the greetings of peace, the greetings of Allah's prophets and messengers. Peace be upon you, or as we traditionally have it in Islam, Assalamu alaikum. You are most welcome to this series of Muslim relations with Christians, Jews, and others. This is one of the courses and programs developed by the Da'wah Institute of the Islamic Education Trust based in Nigeria. In this series, we will be looking at a number of issues. Some are contentious, some are just commonly asked questions that relate to greater peaceful coexistence, and some relate to those issues that mar interfaith relations, that bridge, build, but also that bridge burn. So we will be looking at some of these issues that are discussed in most situations, most contexts where interfaith dialogue is a concern, and we would like to address these from an Islamic point of view. I am your host, Muhammad Nuruddin Lemo, and with me to discuss this episode, at least for today, are two of our distinguished facilitators at the Da'wah Institute, Sister Halima Ahmad and Brother Ibrahim Bello. You're both most welcome. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
I'd like to start by asking Sister Halima if you could start introducing what exactly do we mean by interfaith dialogue or interfaith engagement. Some out there seem to believe interfaith means like an amalgamation, making it all one new thing, one new religion. What exactly is interfaith engagement, interfaith dialogue? What do we mean when we say we want to promote interfaith relations or interfaith bridge building?
Naam, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. As far back as when I was in primary school, I was introduced to the concept of inter-house sports competition, and then we would be in different houses, blue house, green house, red house, and then we would engage in activities. So from that age, I understood that anything that has to mean that means inter or starts with inter definitely means between two or more groups. So we have inter-house competitions, we have inter-class competitions, but we also have international treaties and international events, which is between multiple nations. Sometimes it's between two nations or more. We have intercontinental events, which is between continents. So we could have a treaty between Africa and Europe, for example, which is intercontinental. And also we have interfaith or sometimes interreligious, which is just like all these different interstate, intertribal, meaning between two states, between two tribes, between two religions. So when we come to interfaith or interreligious, depending on how it is used, we are simply talking about dialogue or mediation or engagement between individuals or communities belonging to two or more different religious beliefs or faith traditions. And then when we talk about dialogue, which in Arabic is usually called hiwar, we're really talking about interaction between two or more individuals or groups. So it is different from a monologue where I am talking to myself, probably on radio, for example, even though I have an audience, but it's not there, so I'm just talking on my own. But when we are talking about a dialogue, then we are talking about people of different faiths coming together. So basically, interfaith dialogue, interfaith engagement is about people belonging to different faiths coming together to discuss, to talk, to get to know one another better, to chart a way forward towards a more peaceful coexistence. And this is very important for us, not just in our history, but also in contemporary society, because no man is an island, no nation is completely homogeneous. People live, human beings are social beings, and as such, people live in families where there are different people belonging to a family. People live in communities, we live in nations, we live in countries, we live in continents, and this means that we would interact with people from different backgrounds on a daily basis. Now, religion is something that is gives a very strong sense of identity for a lot of people. It guides the way that a lot of people lead their lives and how they interact and relate with other people. So interreligious or interfaith dialogue and engagement is important because it is what gives the framework for how individuals and religious communities would interact. So when we talk about interfaith or interreligious, we are not talking about unification of religions or multi-religious. We're not talking about bringing religions together and then fusing them into a different kind of religion that has components of all the different constituents. So when we're talking about interfaith, we are just talking about people belonging to different faiths and staying true to the teachings and practices of their independent religions, coming together for dialogue, for engagement, for the greater good. So I would liken it to the difference between a fruit salad, for example, and a fruit juice. So while I bring apple and bananas, pineapple together, and I decide to make a fruit juice with it, by the time I blend it all together, you cannot tell whether this is the banana or the pineapple. It's all mixed, and then we now have a different product that contains something from all these different fruits. But that is different from a fruit salad, because looking at a fruit salad, you can easily distinguish the banana from the apple, from the pineapple, and that is what interreligious is all about. That even though we come together, we work together as members of the common human family, we still recognize our differences, we still stay true to our traditions, and we do not compromise on our ideals and faith. And then when it comes to interreligious dialogue and engagement, it's also not something new for us as Muslims. This is something that has been there in our history from as far back as the time of the Prophet ﷺ himself. We would realize, for example, that we have the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which was a treaty that was developed and signed by the Muslims led by Prophet Muhammad and the Quraysh. Now, these were people belonging to two different faiths, but before the document was produced, there was the dialogue and engagement that occurred, even to the point of agreeing on what would be the content of that treaty. So that was interfaith dialogue that the Prophet ﷺ himself participated in. We also have the Christians of Najran, for example, sending a delegation to the Prophet ﷺ, and he met with them in his masjid in Medina. They talked and they stayed for up to 3 days. These are some examples of interfaith dialogue from the time of the Prophet, and which has continued until today. And this is something that we need a lot in our contemporary society, just as it was needed in the time of the Prophet and back in history. When we look at interreligious dialogue and engagement, a lot of people feel this is just all about talk and sitting around tables, eating and drinking, and afterwards everybody goes back home. But interreligious dialogue is in phases. So the first phase of interreligious dialogue, especially when it is done in a more systemic and institutional manner, is more about trust building, harmony building, relationship building. So this is where people of different faiths, especially their leaders, sometimes come together to better understand the other. What do you believe? What are our differences? What are our similarities? What are those things that connect us as members of different religious groups? And it also helps to clear the stereotypes that people have against the other. Often when you view people of a particular faith or race or tribe from afar, you have some perceived notions about them. Oh, this is how they behave. This is what they are. This is what their religious texts tell them. And all of this is based on assumptions or your observations. But when you relate with them directly, you can hear directly from the horse's mouth. This is what our religion says about this issue, and this is why it says so. This is the wisdom behind it. So this helps to bring about understanding between these religious groups, and we see this from the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him himself. So in our society, we have informal interfaith going on a daily basis in the markets, in the schools, in the malls, and the shops. People relate with people of other faith anyway. So when we talk about interfaith dialogue now and doing it in a more systemic manner, it is just about doing what we have already been doing in a more institutionalized and formal way. And all of this is geared towards peace and security in the society, which are things that are very fundamental to Islam, and which the Maqasid, the higher objectives of the Sharia seeks to protect and to ensure that we have in our society. So I would say that interfaith dialogue and engagement between religious leaders of various faith groups and even members of various faith groups is a form of fardu kifaya, which is a communal obligation that people have to engage in order for us to either promote peace in our society or to sustain the peace that we have in our society, to develop early warning signs towards conflict or tensions that could de-escalate into violence and prevent such kind of violence. And in Islam, we have the principle that whatever is needed for something that is essential is itself essential. And because of that, interfaith dialogue is actually very essential for us in our society today, considering the different challenges that we are facing.
MashaAllah. I mean, you've touched on a number of issues on what it is, and you made it clear this is nothing new. Every community is in one way or the other like a fruit salad. You always have people of other tribes, other religions, other ideologies, other races, all within the community. And you gave the example of the marketplace as a place where this reality is there. And the purpose of interfaith is not to blend it all into one, but to look at how to live together. If we're going to have greater justice in society, then truth is essential. But truth cannot be based on misconceptions. And so hearing from the horse's mouth allows you to clear misconceptions others have about you, but also which you have about others. You've mentioned this issue of interfaith as hiwar. The Quran uses, this question of mujadala, of negotiation or argument, of dialogue or hiwar, of ta'aruf, of knowing each other, of da'wah, of calling, but also of sulhu, of peace building. Malam Ibrahim, on the question of this interfaith dialogue, its importance, what more can you share with us on this subject?
Like she said earlier, interfaith is about trying to understand ourselves better, because ignorance breeds fear and hostility. So if people don't have opportunity of coming together, particularly in ever-increasing diverse world, where we are more interdependent, multicultural, and multi-religious, with the urbanization, people from different religions come together. Also, people of different religion don't actually fall from different heaven. They are from the same descendant. So it's about faith and belief. So the need for us to understand ourselves better. More so, you have a rise in misinformation, mistrust. People are becoming more tribalistic, religiously biased, based on what they are fed with, the information they are fed with. So the need to institutionalize interreligious dialogue is very important for mutual understanding, peaceful coexistence.
Sister Halima even says it's a fardu kifaya.
Yes.
That, we must have people involved in peace.
And because you've gotten people who have taken that as their job to create hate speech, hostility, deliberate distortion and misinformation of other people's faith and truth. So this whole idea of interfaith dialogue becomes much more important. Similarly, you can always find this kind of misinformation and bridge builders or bridge burners from all faiths. So interfaith dialogue is all trying to say, let's understand ourselves. Because all of us know, from our religious perspective, from wherever you come from, there are good people, those who are trying to promote peace. And you've got other people who are against it. You have people who use religion to cause chaos and confusion. So interfaith is that forum that allows people to come together, understand, and know that in reality, Islam, and maybe to a great extent, maybe other religions, are actually not against people of other faiths by mere being from different faiths. it's also important for Muslims to understand that interfaith gives us an edge to address our realities and extremisms. Yeah, because as I said earlier, you have extreme people, extreme position from both divides. So as Muslims, we know and we are in control of our own, and it's interfaith that allow us to showcase and explain to others that, okay, that you see is wrong. But if we don't even relate, they believe whatever they see. Because from far, they believe whatever a Muslim does is Islamic. So a Muslim kills, Muslims are killers. A Muslim does this. And don't forget that with the rise of extremism, on both sides of the religions, like whatever religion you're coming from, there is much need for this interfaith thing. Because extremism is against the essence of Islam. Because if you look at from the reality of Islam, Islam is always in favor of peace building, peaceful coexistence, tolerance. When we look at the history of how the Prophet ﷺ started in Mecca, and in fact, Quran in itself supports interfaith. Because Quran addresses people of other faiths. قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ تَعَالَوْا قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ. You know, Islam come like somebody addressing people in a marketplace. So you address this, you address this, you address this. That is interfaith. So these things are important, and that is why Muslims should take interfaith serious. Interfaith is not strange. Also, there is need for Muslims to address issues of intrafaith that lead to extremism. Because we've always got people within Muslim community that are coming up with arguments that are bridge burning. So Muslims should address these issues. Because extremism, like she mentioned earlier, feeds the phobia industry. People from the other side of the divide always point to that extreme position as justification for their own counter-Islamophobia. So Muslims should also try to identify where are these loopholes, what are they, what are their justification, particularly issue of violence, issue of intolerance, because these are the key issues. You come to jihad, you come to relation with non-Muslims, Muslims need to get it right. There is a difference between theory and practice. There is a difference between ideal, what did Islam actually wanted, and what transpired over history. So if Muslims don't engage in interfaith, there will be no room for them to showcase how they are trying to checkmate this. So these are some of the reasons why it is very important for Muslims to engage in interfaith.
This is a very important point. The point you touch on intra-faith, that within the faith, the need to discuss and deal with our own extremism, but the role of interfaith in clarifying to the other about our own extremism so that people don't think we're all one. Every community has what they call the wolf in sheep's clothing. The wolf that's really destroying your community, but it dresses like you. And somebody who is not used to distinguishing between sheep and wolf doesn't really know what the wolf looks like when it is in sheep's clothing. Somebody once put it is an American who is better at telling you the difference between a fake dollar and a genuine US dollar.
Sure.
It is a Nigerian who is better at telling you the genuine naira from the fake naira.
Sure.
It is the British who is better at telling you the genuine from the fake. And so when it comes to what does Islam really teach, the best source of that information is to listen to Muslim scholars.
Sure.
If you really want to know what Judaism teaches or what Christianity teaches, you would need to ask the reliable people, not any Christian, not any Jew, but a knowledgeable one. And so for interfaith dialogue between scholars, people of knowledge, it is what allows the other community to really know what the leadership of this community stands for and how they can be safe from each other and work together. And I appreciate the point, Halima, you were making earlier, that one of the first objectives of interfaith dialogue is bridge building, trust building, just getting to know each other before going to the more substantive issues of social justice, structural justice, and grievances. The question I'd like to, you touched on this question of the difference between ideals and realities. There's what Islam prescribes when you look at the Quran, Sunnah, and how the Prophet and his companions lived. Islam and interfaith relations. But there's also what has transpired or conspired in some instances over history within Muslim communities. Could you highlight or say more on that?
Yeah, the ideal relationship, propagated by Islam is that of bridge building and peace. This is supported by clear text of Quran and Sunnah, and in fact, classical methodology of interpretation. It is supported by Maqasidu Sharia. It is supported by Ma'lum min ad-din bi-darura. That is ideal.
Ma'lum min ad-din being
Bi-darura means those that are thawabit, in the undisputable text, classical text.
teachings of the religion.
Now look at it. That was how the Prophet lived. But in trying to take example from history, once you go beyond the generation of the Prophet and the Sahaba, then what you have there is not ideal. It's not necessarily ideal. So people should differentiate between theory or the practical example of the Prophet and what transpired after. The reality has always been sometimes Muslims are fair, sometimes they are not fair. There has been hostility supported by political sentiment. It's like in Nigeria, when you have, a fight or a clash between two tribes where there is a sharp divide in the religion, it is easily assumed that it's a fight between two religions. And often it is not. So this has been the reality in history. Sometimes you have one king or one ruler supporting it, one tribe, one this and that. So a number of these things have happened in history. So people should differentiate and understand Islam from its text and the Prophet ﷺ. Also, whatever you want to think, whatever position of hostility people take or interpretation that leads to that hostility, please, it should be proven from Quran and Sunnah and other truths of interpretation and critique. If this is not done, then we are left to our choices, prejudice, and a number of things. And Muslims should be given this benefit because same thing happened from other religions. I don't believe like Christianity preaches hostility against others. We've got cases of Christians doing that. So it will not be fair for somebody to judge Islam afar from those kind of things. But ideally, Islam says, "La yanhakumullahu anil ladhina lam yuqatilukum fid din." Allah does not forbid you from relating peacefully with justice with those who don't fight you on account of your religion. These verses were revealed almost before the death of the Prophet, meaning that has been the norm. So we should understand the difference between ideal and reality. This is the ideal, but reality has had positive, negative, normal, abnormal, and people with their own different justification. But let's be fair to religion itself from its original teaching.
So you've touched on how religion is sometimes a part of a bigger mixture in human society, that have communities that may have racial problems, they may have xenophobic problems, they hate foreigners, they hate people of other religions, they hate people who are in a particular guild, a particular profession, people who are upper class, and sometimes there's a religious divide, which makes it difficult and makes stereotyping easy, makes it very difficult to distinguish what's religious and what's not religious. When it comes to this question of separating what is purely religious and what is not in interfaith relations, hostilities, this is going to be very difficult in some communities. When you look at the marketplace and you see everything going fine, Muslims, Christians, Jews, atheists, everybody buying and selling. When you go to the hospital, when you go and look at the schools and all of that,
that's the ideal.
You see that. How do you separate religious from other identities that may be involved in conflicts or tensions, Sister Halima?
As you have mentioned, the ideal in interfaith relations is peace and peaceful coexistence between Muslims and people of other faiths. But in reality, we've had a lot of tension and conflicts and sometimes violence and killing of Muslims or by Muslims, depending on where you are and which time in history and what the context is. Now, in in the past, perhaps it was easier to separate between what was purely a religious motivated war and what was political. And often, even at that time, religious was also tied to politics. For example, from the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the caliphs that came after him, the Prophet was not just a religious leader, he was also a political leader. So he had to make decisions not just like as an imam, but also as as a leader of a people. And both him and those who came after him had to live in a context of either conquer or be conquered, or have treaties in order to have peace with people around you. So this was at a time where the world superpowers, the Romans, the Persians, were conquering lands, pillaging, killing, and then would have people under their control and authority, and they would be paying some form of taxes to them and all of that. So this was quite the norm. So at this time, it was not really about religion, it was very much political. But then it would also happen that often one part of the conflicts belongs to a religion and the others are Muslim. So even at that time, there was some sort of, oh, Muslims are being attacked, or this is as religion, even though it is not just religion, but religion and political. It got worse over time, because now a lot of times when we have this kind of tensions and challenges, it's not just religion, politics. We are also looking at economic, we are looking at resource control, we are looking at historical grievances behind some of these tensions and conflicts that we have in our society, which is why interreligious dialogue is very, very important. And from our experience, we find that it is easier when you come to interreligious dialogue, for example, to start with looking at the theological side. What does our religion really say about relating with people of other faiths? And in most cases, for most world religions, you would see that the religious texts themselves do not have any problem with their adherents relating peacefully with people of other faiths. At that point, it is easier to now delve into what then is the problem? What exactly is the problem? Why then are we fighting? Why are we having these issues? And then we can look at what are those real or perceived grievances that people have that is fueling their hate and anger against people of other faiths. In some context, it is about the anger that came with as a result of the legacy of colonialism, for example. So in some context in Nigeria, for example, you have places where a particular tribe or ethnic group have been subjugated or suffered injustice over the years as a result of the legacies of colonialism, that when the colonial masters came, they favored some ethnic groups and tribes over others. And even though it's been over 60 years after they've left, it's been difficult for the marginalized groups to actually keep up. And often you find that these marginalized groups belong to one religion, while those who have been favored belong to another religion. And so there is tension, there is this grievance there. And then when you have this kind of tensions and conflict, it is often just framed as this is a religious tension, whereas there is some underlying context that is not taken into consideration. We also have the issue to do with resource control, for example, and this has even been exacerbated by climate change, where, for example, you have farmers and herders fighting over land to graze their animals, or in the case of the farmers, land to plant their crops. And unfortunately, the farmers belong to one religious group and the herders belong to the other religious group. And instead of concentrating on what is the underlying issue, it's the resource that they are competing for, and then we focus on what is at the periphery, which is the religious divide, and then we classify it as a religious conflict when it is not actually religious. We also have things to do with political hypocrisy, because politicians often feed on what would work to their own advantage. So in doing this, they often perpetuate the religious divide and try to capitalize on this to get support for themselves. So you have politicians making insightful comments against people of a different faith in order to get the buy-in of people of a larger group. So these kind of things also fuel interreligious conflicts and tensions, and then it is often put at laid at the doorstep of the religion. And also very disheartening, we have the issue of religious leaders making insightful comments on what would be considered hate speech from their members and pulpits, which would then incite their members to be aggressive and hostile towards people of other faiths. So these are some of the reasons and the challenges that different contexts are facing, and it will be different for different contexts. So in some places, maybe resource control is not the problem, but it is the problem is that of race, for example, where people who belong to a particular race and are in the majority belong majorly to a particular religion, while people of color or people who belong to another race also happen to belong to another religion, and then there is tension, but these factors are not taken into consideration, and it is taken just as a religious conflict. So it is important when analyzing any of these kind of conflicts to be careful in trying to understand what exactly is happening, and to not take it in a simplistic manner as this is just one group killing the other or being aggressive towards the other, but trying to look at the historical grievances, the perceived grievances that may be underlying this conflict, and see how to resolve these issues, because without resolving them, we would not be able to achieve the peace and stability that we want. And lastly, I think very important is the issue of media framing, because this also has a huge effect on how people deal with issues and interact with people of other faith. In some contexts, especially in Nigeria, when you have conflicts between people belonging to different groups, if both groups belong to the same religion, then you do not see the religious framing coming up in the reporting of the issue on media. It is this tribe and this tribe are fighting or have issues. But if peradventure one of the groups happen to be a Muslim group, for example, and the other is a Christian group, then the religious framing comes up more prominently, even though they may have been fighting over a borehole or electricity or land or anything at all. So you have this issue of always framing a particular group, which is usually Muslims in many cases, as perpetrators all the time. And whenever they are victims of injustice and persecution by people of other faiths, you do not see such framing coming in. Often we do not even count the numbers when Muslims are the victims. Often it is even underreported or unreported at all when Muslims are victims of prejudice and violence coming from people of other faiths. Now, while having an Olympics of suffering or victimhood is not helpful to anybody or helpful to peace and security in the society, it is important for the populace to be aware of this framing of the media in this issue, so that people are more objective in how they receive news around this kind of issues, and they are also objective in how they approach resolving these issues when it comes to interreligious forums and engagements.
Thank you very much. This very important couple of points you've touched, that if people have wrong diagnosis, they would most likely end with wrong prescriptions. And if you're really going to diagnose and understand the cause of the problem, was it ethnic? Was it about resources? Was it majority minority rights? Is it about indigents and settlers? Is it about foreigners? Is it actually about religion? That unless you have dialogues and sincere discussions to understand the problems, we end up on a wild goose chase where people keep prescribing medicine that has nothing to do with the problem. It's interesting, I recall in the Encyclopedia of War, which is like a 3-volume encyclopedia of nearly 2,000 wars between people over a recorded history, it actually concluded that only about 7% of wars and conflicts were about religion. Yeah, just about, I think, 7.3% had anything to do with religion. And one would be very interested in actually finding those ones that had to do with religion, what exactly was the religious aspect of it? But just a point that I found interesting, that many people like to say, oh, religion again, whereas sometimes it's the framing by people who are reporting that is making it sound religious. When you dig deeper, you find it sometimes has nothing to do with religion.